Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar. Perhaps I should say good evening, good morning, or good afternoon, because I understand that we got over 140 colleagues from many parts of the world participating in this webinar. So as you can see, the title of this webinar series, number 4, is social responsibility in teaching and learning. What works? Basically, the topic is very important because in different universities, we are really concerned about how to nurture social responsibility in young people, okay? This is important because there is research showing that there has been a drop in empathy and increase in egocentrism in university students. So in a way, many universities, many educators, teachers are asking a question: how can we nurture students' social responsibility? And of course, one way we can do this is through civic learning via service learning. That is, I think a lot of us know that service learning is a high impact pedagogy that can promote changes in students. But one question is, okay, if we do it in a voluntary manner, it means that we can only attract those who are passionate about serving others. But on the other hand, if we do it in a mandatory manner, then those who are reluctant to serve, they may have some bad experience. So eventually it is a scientific question. So how can we promote civic learning through service learning? Is there any evidence showing that even if we do it in a compulsory manner, the students can benefit from service learning experience? Okay, so that is the backdrop of tonight's webinar. So we're very pleased to have two speakers with us. Dr. Grace Ai, she is the current head of the Service Learning and Leadership Office at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And Dr. Stephen Chen, he was the former head of the Office of Service Learning at PolyU. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the time to Grace and Stephen, please. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Jack, and thank you everybody for attending this webinar. Now, before we dive into the content of the talk today, please allow me to make a little bit of a promotion, as some of us come from, I think, mainly from the USRN network community, and some of us come from another community under the banner of the IRSI, Asia Pacific Regional Community of Practice. I hope to somehow bring the two groups together closer. For the USRN, it has a long history, and I don't need to repeat that. The Asia Pacific Community of Practice is actually quite new. We're very, very young. This is our very first event, and hopefully we can bring the regional community closer together so that we can get to know each other better, and together we make a bigger contribution to the worldwide community. Right? So without further ado, let's get going. Now, today we are going to try to answer this question. Does it work to try to use service learning as a tool to promote civic learning among university students? That is a question that we want to answer. But before we can tell you about our research, we have to give you a little bit of the context. What do we mean by service learning? As service learning can mean different things for different people at different communities, different universities, and so on and so forth. So we have to let you know a little bit. about the context in which we conduct this research, right? And so we have to tell you what do we do at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University regarding service learning. Now, we have nothing about 12 years ago when we started this program. The program has formally been in existence for about 10 years now. 12 years ago, we decided to start the program. So we spent 2 years trying to build it up. And then gradually, we built it up to the scale that we are today. Today, we have quite a big program. But remember, 12 years ago, we had zero, nothing. Today, we have quite a diverse set of subjects, many different teachers coming from different backgrounds, disciplines. And we are also addressing different needs in the local community as well as in several other countries. So that is the state that we are today. Now, throughout this 10 to 12 years of work, we have done a lot of research in terms of trying to answer the question, does this whole thing work? Because the university invested a lot of resources in terms of manpower, in terms of money and time and effort. So it is important for us to know whether this is achieving the purposes that we originally decided. And we're happy to report to you that based on the data that we have collected, it seems to work. And we're going to try to tell you a little bit of the major findings. And also, we would like to also send a message to our own community in the Asia-Pacific region that a lot of us are interested in doing research in service learning, but some of us are not quite sure how to do this and whether it is even possible. And the message that we're hoping to send is that, yes, indeed, it is possible and it does work. And also, particularly because of the Asia-Pacific is a very big and diverse region. We have very different contexts, environments, history, ethnic communities, and political situations and whatnot. We have a lot to tell the world about our experience based on the data that we do. Right? That's what we hope to do today. Okay. Right. Now, just very quickly, what do we mean by civic learning? That's it can be very simple. We want our students to become active, responsible citizens in their own community, right? That's really what it is. We want them to be involved in the formal political process. We also want them to be involved in the informal processes in the various civic organizations and so on and so forth. We have no political stand. It is up to the students themselves, but we simply want them to understand and be engaged with the community. But they have to start with some knowledge and build up their own passion, compassion for the people who are underprivileged among the community. So that's the objective. Now, how do we do this? Social responsibility, if you can tell from the title of the USRN, we are assuming that this is something that is common among all universities. This is something that is considered desirable for everyone. The question is, how do we achieve that? In our case, we aim at 4 major outcomes. First of all, they have to be competent professionals in their own discipline. Then we want them to learn to solve problems creatively. They have to communicate, be able to tell people what they have done, their ideas, and how to solve the problems. And then we want them to be global citizens. They don't just care about their own community, but also the whole wide world, but in an educated manner, right? So that's the overall objectives. Now, what does that really mean? We would like them to acknowledge their own responsibilities to the society, to their own country, in an ethical and moral manner. That's something we felt the students were missing for a long, long time. And that's the gap that we hope to fill with service learning. We want them to be interested in the community and actively, positively engaged. we want them to appreciate not just their own academic discipline, but also the artistic, cultural environment of their community. At the same time, we want them to have a sensitivity and respect for diverse culture. Those are very big aims. At the PolyU, we use service learning in a big way. We make it a core part of the education. We require all our undergraduate students to take at least one 3-credit, letter-graded service learning course. Each year, we have an average of roughly 4,500 students who are required to take service learning. That's roughly the scale of our program. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole program, but just want to highlight. On the upper left-hand corner, that's our general education. We call it general university requirements, but that's really, general education. It consists of roughly 1/4 of their undergraduate education. Among this 1/4, roughly 1 year's worth of general education, we require them to take one course in service learning. So it may sound a lot, requiring all undergraduates to take service learning. But in fact, it is only one course among roughly 40 courses that they're going to take for the undergraduate, right? It's really not that much. But that's very important because it helps us to achieve a very important objective. Right? Now, on the upper right-hand corner, there are 4 common learning outcomes that all service learning courses must achieve. I'm not going to repeat that because it takes a little bit of time, so we don't have that much time. But in terms of what they actually do, the lower part of the slide gives you an overall picture. In the middle, you see 40 hours of service that the students are committed to do by taking this course. But more importantly, before they can carry out the project, they have to undergo at least 60 hours of preparation, lectures, workshops, so that they can deliver the service. And then while they are doing the service and afterwards, they have to engage in about 20 hours of reflection on what they have done, what we have learned, and what we can do better. Right? Those are all important components. It's not just the 40 hours of service, which is very visible, but the preparation and the reflection are equally important elements. And that's what we mean by service learning at PolyU. Now, things have not been plain sailing. From the very beginning, we encountered a lot of opposition, objections to even doing service learning, let alone giving them credit, let alone making it compulsive. And I'm sorry. There are even questions to the need of doing service learning. There are professors who claim that the Hong Kong is such a wealthy society that we don't really have that many people who need service. There are people who say you need students who are trained in social science, if not being a social worker, but at least in social science humanities to understand, to actually take service learning. There are people who were saying that only professors who are trained in humanities and social science can teach service learning. There are people who say science and engineering professors like Grace and myself, we do not know how to guide students to do reflection, which was partially true, but we can learn. Just like our students, we can learn to do these kind of things. Student learning is difficult to assess in service learning. Subjective, yes, it is subjective. That doesn't mean that it cannot be reliable. We can train ourselves to do these things reliably. So all of those objections, it turns out, can be overcome and indeed have been overcome. Now, I'm not going to go through the subject. The purpose of having these slides is hopefully to give you, to convince you, to give you the impression that that is wide participation in terms of departments, professors, offering a wide range of subjects. This is our Faculty of Applied Science and Textiles. They have like 7 subjects coming from 4 different departments. And then in the lower part, we have the Faculty of Business. They have 4 subjects coming from 2 different departments. And then in the construction environment, 4 departments, 8 subjects. Engineering, this is one of the biggest group of subjects coming from, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different departments, more than 10 subjects. Now, very often people wonder, what can engineering students and professors do in supervisioning? But think about it. What is the origin of engineering? If not using applying science to solve real-world problems, that was the origin of engineering. Engineering exists to solve problems. So what better use of engineering to solve real-world problems? And that's where we came from. Applied social science, of course, that's almost their bread and butter, right? Because among them there is social work and all the other related departments and disciplines. They are some of the core members of this whole program. And then we have rehabilitation science, nursing, optometry. They all exist to serve people various needs. So naturally they are there. Humanities, languages, culture, history, those are all important services that we can offer the community. And even design, right? It is a little bit unusual for university to have a department on design, but we do, and they do very good work. One of the surprises is hotel and tourism management. They have 4 courses, all very interesting courses. That's one of the uniqueness of our university. Some of these very professional, very practical disciplines offering very interesting services. This is kind of an overall picture in terms of numbers. On the top, you see the growth in terms of courses or subjects in our own jargon. Starting with very small number, now we have around 70 subjects who have been approved. Just this morning, we approved a few more. Sorry, early this afternoon, we have a couple more subjects have been approved. The number of students, they're growing and growing and growing. The biggest number served in Hong Kong, a fairly large number served in mainland China. Now, I can tell you, just the number that served in mainland China and overseas is bigger than some of the programs in many universities that practice supervision. So in terms of size, I think our university has one of the larger programs in the whole wide world. And at the bottom are some of the hours. I'm not going to go into details, but this is just to give you, hopefully, a sense of the size of the program. And this is the basis of our research. Our research comes from the experience of offering, validating, running these courses. In Hong Kong, we basically cover all the 18 different districts. We cover not all the provinces in mainland China, but a fairly large number. And internationally, we cover not 10 countries yet, but getting close. Here we list 7, but there are 2 or 3 countries in which we are planning. We were going to these countries until the pandemic hit. And we hope to resume to get to this country as soon as possible. And that includes the Philippines, which we are serving electronically online. That includes also Tanzania, and now, which we were going to go until the pandemic hit. And we hope to go back. All right, here are just some snapshots, the piece of things that we do. Upper left-hand corner, you see people from applied science and textile, using their skills, helping people design their clothing as a kind of therapy for people who are suffering from various kinds of illnesses. In the middle, construction and environment. You can see those big pots. Those are water filtration systems to help to give people clean up water. On the right-hand side, hotel and tourism management. You go to different places to help them develop their tourism programs, help people to run their hotels, and particularly helping underprivileged youth who may not have a really good formal education to get into the business. Right? Those are some of the things that we can do creatively. On the middle, on the right, that's the design people. On the left-hand side, well, actually, crossing the whole road are the various engineering projects, solar panels, building better living environments, and that kind of thing. On the lower side, lowest row, you see the health science and social science people, humanities people, teaching, languages, and so on. And I think we can skip some of these because we really don't have time, right? But you can see the pictures, some of those pictures. I'll just flash the picture so you can get a sense of what they do. This is very interesting, right? You can see fashion as therapy, and hotel and tourism management, developing the better hotels and restaurants, engineering, construction, solar panels for electricity. Now, we have to mention this. COVID-19, the pandemic hit everybody, but service learning particularly hard because service learning depend a lot on human-to-human interaction, helping people in person. We cannot travel, we cannot even go to meet people, even in Hong Kong. So we moved the service online. Unlike many establishments, many universities, which basically suspend their program or drastically scale down the program. In our case, because we are committed to give the students the opportunities to learn through taking service learning courses, that's a requirement to graduate, so we have no choice but to persevere and continue. So we move a lot of the services online. And these are just some of the examples. Once you move things online, then this distance is no longer a barrier. If we can serve people online in Hong Kong, we can serve people online in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in the United States, in South Africa, in mainland China, right? So the barrier is only our imagination. And we can do a lot of things online. Of course, we can do instruction online, but we can also supplement verbal type of instruction by giving them the tool, some of the gadgets. For example, if you give them a small, cheap microscope, they can take a leaf, pull it up 70 times, and see the veins in the leaf remotely. These things are easy to chip. They are not actually very expensive. Nowadays, microscopes can be made by simply attaching a one more lens to a smartphone. And of course, we can do virtual reality, give them cheap virtual reality eyepieces. And then you can do augmented reality. You can do a lot of artificial intelligence things using online applications. Here is one of our very ambitious projects. You can see two universities involved here. On the upper left-hand side, here is our partner in South Africa, University of Victoria. They are serving some kids in their townships. These are poor kids that the students from Victoria are serving. On the lower left-hand corner, we have our PolyU students serving local kids. These two service projects are going in parallel, but at the same time, PolyU students are communicating, working together with the Victoria students. And then we cross the students that they serve together. So there are 4 groups of students, some universities, some of the local schools working together. And they are using advanced tools like 360-degree cameras, VR goggles, and it's all possible without anybody traveling. That's what COVID-19 made us do. If it had not happened, we might have eventually come to this, but it might have taken many more years. Because of COVID-19, it caused so many problems. But at the same time, it also stimulates challenges to think so-called out of the box and do something that we did not think would be possible before. Here is another direction that we are going to. We could not go to Rwanda to install solar panels that we have been doing for many years. So what did we do? We bought the solar panels from mainland China. We brought them to Hong Kong, do a lot of the pre-assembly, packaging them. You can see, you can see a anti-clockwise picture from the upper left-hand corner. On the left-hand side, you see our students assembling solar panels in Hong Kong. Then in the lower left-hand corner, you see those things have put into packages, boxes. They are then shipped to Rwanda. In the middle, lower panel, you see the young people, volunteers from Rwanda, unpacking those things that we ship over there. And then lower right corner, our students helping the local Rwanda youths to unpack the solar panels and then assemble them together. Then they take them to their villages to install the solar panels. Using this method, just last summer, we installed solar panels for 150 households. We used to take our students over there to do most of the installation. Now our students did the pre-assembly in Hong Kong, but they helped the local volunteers in Rwanda to install the solar panels themselves. The pandemic forced us to rely more on our local partners in Rwanda. We were forced to do it, but at the same time, it achieved a lot more than we could have imagined. So the pandemic is a curse from some aspects, but at the same time, it is a blessing hidden inside the curse. It depends on how we take the opportunity, take the challenge. Okay, I think I probably used up all my time already. I have to pass it to Grace to tell you what we really want to tell you, which is what kind of research we have done.
Thank you, Stephen. Here I need to first bring up give a few shout out to Professor Robert Hollister, whom I think is here. I saw his name earlier. One of the things that at PolyU, when we first started doing service learning, that we knew that we were going to be up against is that the fact that we make it a requirement means that there's going to be a whole bunch of students who don't really want to be doing service learning, but who are going to be forced to be doing service learning. So the question, of course, is what happens when you make people who don't really want to do a good thing, when you force them to do it, right? Can you mandate an attitude on people? Can you mandate effective learning on people? Right now, we know, of course, that it's possible to teach kids something that they're not good at. That's why we have an English requirement. That's why we have a math requirement. And, all students have to do these, right? But what happens when you put in a civic learning requirement? Do these things really work? Or do they actually turn people off? Okay. And over the years, we have been doing a lot of studies into all of this, and we would like to share some of the results with you tonight. So these are the research questions. Do students who are not civically inclined learn less from service learning than those who are civically engaged, who are already civically engaged, right? And then the other question also is, can students' perceptions about service learning change? So these were our initial two research questions. Shortly after we started our service learning program, we knew that we had to answer these two questions to answer a lot of concerns from the university community. So this is one of the first pieces of research that we did that was back in 2017 and 18. We surveyed students as far as to their learning, their self-perceived learning along 4 dimensions: the intellectual learning, social learning, civic learning, and personal learning. These are the 4 learning outcomes that the PolyU all service learning courses have to target at. And then we also asked them about some independent variables. We asked them about whether or not they were taking the course because they were interested in the course. Remember that PolyU students can choose which subject to take. So we asked them, so why are you taking a subject? Is it because you're interested in it? right? We know the students don't always pick a subject because they're interested. Some students pick a subject because their friends are taking it. Some students pick a subject because they know it's easy. Some students pick a subject because it's got a nice schedule, etc., whatever, okay? We also ask them at the end of the subject, the learning experience, to rate the learning experience. And this is using a basket of items. We ask them, do you feel supported in the subject? Do you feel that your TAs were there when you needed it? Do you feel that you had a good experience with interacting with the community, et cetera, right? So this is the learning experience. We also ask them, okay, were you taking this course primarily to fulfill the service learning requirement? Some students will be, no, I'm taking the course because I want to, because I'm interested, whatever. Okay, or I want to help people. Some students, however, most of our students actually would say, no, I am taking the course primarily because you make me do it. Okay, so this is these are the three independent variables. Okay, and if we look at the correlations between the independent variables and the dependent variables, one of the first things that I think we can notice is that the fact that students were taking the course primarily to meet the service learning requirement is not strongly, is not significantly correlated with their learning outcome. What does this mean? This means that students, regardless of whether they are taking the course because they really care about people, because they really want to help people, versus students who are taking the course because they're forced to, they do not learn significantly differently. Okay, so even if students are taking the course because they're forced to do it, okay, they don't learn significantly less than students who are taking the course because they really care about people and because they really want to serve the community. So that's the first thing that helped us, right? We know that making students do service learning does not turn them off, essentially. Okay, the second thing that for me personally as a teacher, I found big comfort in is that over and over we found that the single thing that was the most strongly correlated, most statistically significantly correlated with student learning is the learning experience. And that was encouraging for us. How? That's encouraging because that is the only piece that we can control. We can't control student motivation. We can't control student interest. Right? But we can control the learning experience. I can try my best to make sure that students feel supported. I can try my best to schedule the project such that they have a lot of time to interact with the community. I can help the preparation, right? I can design the project well. These are all things within my control. And for me as a teacher, it's very encouraging that this is the piece that is the most strongly correlated with the learning outcomes. So that was the first thing that we learned. The second thing that we learned was that students' perceptions of service learning can and do change. We interview students as to their perceptions of the service learning requirement. And we found that students at the beginning, the majority of the students were kind of what we would call passively accepting of the requirement. They weren't really positive about it, but it was like, well, whatever, you asked me to take it, so therefore I'll do it, okay, but I don't really like it. We even had some students who were very negative. You know, this should not be a requirement. It's just wrong to make us volunteer, etc., etc. What we found was that after taking the service learning subject, the majority of the students, their perceptions turned very positive. The majority of them said, this is a good learning experience. I think actually some students even went as far as to say, I think that every student should be mandated to do a service learning course. Okay, we still have some students who are ambivalent, who are like, well, you know, yeah, maybe it's good, but at the same time, the workload is really big, whatever, you know, that sort of thing. Okay, and then we have some students who are negative still. However, one of the things that we found about the students who are negative, they weren't negative about the requirement per se. They were more negative about the experience in the course. So we have students who said, I expected that in service learning, I would be going out to serve the community. However, my teacher made me sit in the lab and, you know, make a piece of software for an NGO. That's not what I was expecting. Okay, so we found that a small minority was still negative, but the negative part was not about the requirement. It was more about the subject. Now, the question is, do students who were initially negative, do they stay negative? Obviously, there were some students who were negative and they turned positive. Okay, but you know, what about the rest of them? what we found was that students who were initially positive, most of them remain positive, some of them turn ambivalent, some of them even turn negative. Okay, students who actually were very excited about the requirement to begin with, sometimes those are the students who are the most difficult to teach because they come with a lot of expectations. Students who are passively accepting, the majority of them became positive. Some of them stayed ambivalent. Okay, one of them had a negative view. Okay, and then of the students who were negative to begin with, all of them turned positive in the end. Now, you will, as sharp-eyed people will find that the numbers don't sum up. Okay, that's because in the positive and the negative batch, there was one student, each of these had one student whose initial view, we were like, I have no idea what in the world you think you're saying. Okay, it couldn't be classified into any one of those three. Okay, so anyway, that's the reason why it doesn't sum up. Okay, but I think the takeaway from this is that students' perceptions can change. Even negative students can be persuaded otherwise. And this is something that I think we as educators, we can be very concerned about. It's okay if a student comes in hating this, right? And every year during subject registration, as head, I have to look through social media and I see students who are whining about the requirements, so on and so forth. And the other day, one of my colleagues was saying to me, Grace, you know, it's normal if students are whining about the requirement because before they take the course, because they don't know what it is about. And then I was reminded of this. So this is some older research, okay? And one of the things that we have been challenged quite often by senior management is, how about after they graduate? We know that immediately after they finish the course, of course they have good learning outcomes, but how long does it stick, right? 5 years, you know, 1.5 years after they graduate, then what? 5 years after they graduate, then what? Okay, do we really turn out more civically engaged citizens? Okay, so these are two research projects that we have been doing, and these are not even published results yet, but I'm sharing this with you right now. Okay, so the research questions were, number one, does the mandatory service learning requirement make students more likely to stay civically active after graduation? Okay, does this stick? And then secondly, retrospectively, what do alumni feel that they have learned from the service learning requirement? Okay, so in order to do this, we survey students 1.5 years to 2 years after they graduated. This is the first piece that I would like to share with you. Okay, we survey students from the class of 2017. This is the class under the last year, okay, of the program that did not have the service learning requirement, okay? So students in this class, they did not have to do any service learning at all. That was under the old program. And then we also survey students from the class of 2018. Okay, now this class is a little bit interesting because in this class, this being the first cohort, there was a so-called escape clause, so to speak. Okay, so students, some of the students who are coming in, okay, with an associate degree were not required to take service learning. Okay, so we have some students who didn't take service learning. We have some students who took service learning. Okay, in these, a big number of students were basically required to, you know, these were the students who came in as freshman students, year 1, and they had to do service learning. These were students who came in at year 3 with an associate degree. They did not need to do service learning if they didn't want to. Okay, and then we also asked them about the community service experience while at PolyU. This is to find out whether or not students were originally somewhat inclined to serve the community, because we know that community service while at college is strongly correlated with community service after they graduate. Okay, now what did we find? One of the things that we found was that, let's look at the bottom row first. Okay, the bottom row, what we see is that students who participated in community service while in the university, they are, of course, a lot more likely to keep on being civically engaged, okay, somewhat in some way, whatever way, after they graduate. No surprises there. Okay, we find that students who did not take the service learning subject, they don't really differ from students who took the service learning subject. If they did community service at university, they are more likely to continue staying civically engaged after graduation. Okay, however, the exciting thing for us was that if you look at the class of 2018, okay, the students who were forced to take a service learning subject, okay, are more likely to be civically active after graduation. So we have got 63% of the students who took the service learning subject, okay, who did not participate in community service while Poly U, okay, they were actually still active in community a year and a half after they graduated. Okay, so this is the strongest evidence that we have today that shows that the service learning requirement, number one, it does not turn off students who are already civically active. Okay, the second thing is that it helps students who are not originally, okay, civically inclined to be active citizens after graduation. This is the strongest evidence that we have of date. Okay, the second question is, after graduation, a year and a half, 2 years after they graduate, what do these alumni remember having learned from service learning? Okay, so these are the recollections of their learning. Okay, one of the things that we find is that essentially they all say that they learned a fair amount and more from service learning. Okay, the majority of them remember the social learning. Okay, social learning meaning being able to work in teams, being able to communicate, etc., etc. Okay, many of them also remember the civic learning. Civic learning meaning being an active member of community, being a socially responsible member, understanding community needs, so on and so forth. Okay, followed by the personal learning, which is the understanding of their own strengths and weaknesses, and then by the intellectual learning, which is critical thinking. Okay, so they all feel that they learn a fair amount when they think back, okay, of the learning. Okay. Now, the question is, how do these outcomes correspond to continued civic engagement? So we took these learning outcomes and we correlated them with students' self-reporting of whether they have been civically active after graduation. And this is what we found. Okay, now I'm not going to go into the table in a lot of depth, but one of the things that but the main takeaway message in here is that for every 1 point increase in the civic outcome rating, okay, the likelihood of continual civic engagement increases by 7.98 percentage points. This is the only outcome. This is the only learning outcome, okay, that is statistically significantly correlated with continued civic engagement. And this stays true even after we control for whether or not they were active in community service during university and their own evaluation of the service learning experience. Okay, so I think the takeaway message from this is that students learn a lot of things from service learning. But if what we are trying to do is to cultivate active citizens, we need to be mindful of the civic learning. We need to be mindful when we prepare students, when we supervise them during the project, when we help them to do reflections, that we guide them to think about their role, you know, and the responsibilities in the community, to think about community needs and how they themselves can constructively engage in community. I think that this is the takeaway message that we have, right? Okay, so these are the research results, right? And I think that the good thing from this is that we know that service learning does work even when it is forced. And when it is properly done, it does help nurture students into active citizens. So the question is, how do we properly do it, right? And 10 years down the line, we have some reflections. So Stephen, would you like to share, you know, about our reflections? And Daniel, we would also like you to chip in as well, being, you know, very much the architect of all of this.
Well, of course, we learned a lot throughout these past 10 years. But one of the most important lessons that we felt that we have learned is that the most important element in a service learning program, at least from our own experience, are the teachers. That is a little bit kind of unexpected because from the very beginning, our focus has been on the students. we design the service learning requirement for the students. We want the students to learn, we want them to serve. So we focus our energy on designing the subjects, designing courses, and watching them, monitoring them, talking with them, and so on and so forth. All the while, we also train the teachers, help them to design and blah, blah, blah. But we always have our focus on the students. But looking back, we felt that it is not wrong, because that's ultimately what we are here for. We are here to educate. But to make the program successful, to make it work, we rely on the teachers to deliver. And one reality, very, very stark, is that the students come and go. They stay in your university, in our university, and most of 4 years. Most of the time, you have them for 1 semester, 1 subject, 3 months, 4 months, at most 5 or 6 months, and then they are gone. They may come back to take another subject. They may come back to get engaged in another project, but then they are gone. We invest a lot on the students. They go and carry the experience, the enjoyment, the fulfillment, and blah, blah, blah with them. Of course, that is good. But to keep the program going, to make it work in the first place, we need the teachers. So one of the things that we have learned is that we have to put more attention on the teachers, helping them, training them, getting them, but ultimately, most importantly, motivate them, keeping them happy with their work. Just like the students, they are engaged, they learn when they feel it is meaningful. Our teachers have to also find it meaningful to teach, to engage. They have to find it fulfilling. Otherwise, they are not going to be able to continue to teach. So that's one of the lessons that we feel that we have learned, and we have to put more attention into this area. So that's also where some of our research are going into too. And no, we don't have a lot of results yet, but that's something that we feel we have to do more research on, how to motivate them, how to keep them, how to get them continue to engage.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. That was our last slide. I think we are finishing almost right on time. So Professor Sheck, I'll give the time back to you.
Okay. Thank you both for your very comprehensive and inspiring sharing. Now we got some questions from the audience. The first one is from Enha. The question is, how did you strengthen faculty involvement in service learning?
Do you want to answer that?
We have, of course, we have done. We have actually put a lot of effort into it. I'm not confident in saying that we have been very successful. We knew from the beginning that we didn't have enough teachers, and we probably still don't. So in the beginning, we ran a lot of workshops to help teachers to explain to them what it is, to get them on board. One of the things that we felt was useful was we let some of those teachers who are interested to come along on the projects, on the teaching, so that they can see firsthand how it can be done. Now, of course, we are not saying that what we are doing is the model, but it is at least one way so that the teachers who have not done it before, but who are nevertheless interested, can see for themselves what it is like to teach a class of service learning, what the students actually do, how to monitor them, support them, and train them, do reflection with them, and that we felt was useful, and that eventually turned into a teacher training course, staff development course that we have been running for many years now. So those are that's one of the things that we felt was useful in getting people on board, getting them interested, getting the feet wet, so to speak. But of course, there are other ways as well.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Now we got another question from James. The question is, okay, in your experience, how do you strike a balance between service and learning to make sure that not only the students benefit, but equally your partner communities as well?
I think that from the very beginning, one of the things that we insisted, and actually at PolyU, the service learning subjects go through a very rigorous approval process. We have a subcommittee that looks at that vets the subjects for as to whether or not they are genuine service learning subjects, and then they are passed to the Senate, and then the Senate there does a final approval. That's a very simplified picture of the process. And actually, there is a joke among some of our colleagues that it is harder to get a service learning subject approved than it is to get a research grant, right? One of the things that we were very careful about very early on was the concept of reciprocity. One of the things that Stephen and I feel very strongly about is that when we send students service learning, students learn in the classroom and the community. Now that basically makes the community a team teacher in your teaching team. Okay, if you don't, we have to think about it in that way. The community is in your teaching team, and it is only right that the community should get some benefit from this as well. We can't offload, our students' learning without giving them something back in return. And so therefore, as a result, very early on, all of the subject proposals that we read, one of the things that we looked at very carefully was, is the community really going to benefit from this? So I think that is where we tried to make sure that our partner universities were not going to get freeloaded off.
I think that there are also at least a couple of things that help. One of them is our service learning courses. They are academic courses. As such, they are under supervision from the department, from the faculty, and also from a central committee that oversees all general university requirements, including service learning. So they ensure that the academic rigor is there, that they are taught properly, that student feedbacks are good, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, we put a lot of emphasis on long-term collaboration with our community partners. And that is another direction ensures that they receive the benefits. Otherwise, they're not going to stay with you, right? If you exploited me once, I'm not going to allow you to exploit me again and again and again. And many of our projects, they continue for years and years and after years. And that is I think a sure sign that our community partners are happy with the relationship, that they are getting the benefits that they expected from the relationship.
Thank you. Now another question from Mark. He asks, can you explain more about the 60 hours project planning, 40 hours project implementation, and 20 hours of project evaluation and reflection? Does it mean that service learning course covered 2 semesters? Is it possible to do it within 1 semester? Is it effective? Okay. So we do have 1 semester and 2 semester service learning subjects.
Yeah, we do have both. One of the things that I think people need to people need to know is that this is not talking about lecture hours. This is talking about student study hours. Okay, now how did the 40 hours come about? The 40 hours came about because 1 free credit course essentially in general takes about 110 to 120 student study effort hours. So 1/3 of that becomes the community. So the idea was that, okay, we'll take half of that for classroom, for the classroom, for preparation, whatever. 1/3 of that students spend in the community, and then the remainder of that is to reflect upon that learning from the community. So that is where the 60-40-20 comes from. And of course, there is some leeway. Some courses do a little bit less in preparation. Some courses do more in reflection, but that is the general format that is followed. The whole thing is one course. And we have, as Professor Shep was saying, we have some courses that are 2 semesters long. We have some courses that are 1 semester. 1 semester courses obviously are a lot more intense on both the teacher as well as students. A majority of them take place during the summer semester, when students are only taking that one subject, and essentially we expect them to do full-time, 6 weeks, you are doing service learning and nothing else. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, another one is from Jarwin. She asked the question is, okay, you just said that when we first started as service learning at PolyU, you received some comments that service learning is not important. So could you talk about a little bit more? How do you change people's opinions and expand the service learning program?
Professor Shep, would you like to answer that?
Okay,
You were involved.
What we need is to convince colleagues about the meaning and the importance of service learning. So basically 2 things. The first one is to collect evidence, just like what Grace and Stephen have done. Let them know that the students actually change in a positive direction, evidence showing that the students like the project, evidence that civic engagement has increased. So that is the first one. And then the second one is we actually invited colleagues to the service sites. And by doing this, they can really know more about service learning is more than community service. And in fact, not just the students change, the teachers also change to become more passionate. And then they become more empathetic. They know that there should be a greater connection between academic knowledge and the needs of the community. Okay, so, but it takes time. Honestly speaking, I always say that at a Senate meeting, when we consider the service learning possibility, 1/4 of the votes were against. So we just got around 75% of colleagues supported. But today, I'm pretty confident that maybe more than 90% of the colleagues, they will say that service learning is good for our students. Okay. Now, the next one, okay, I will skip one from Xu Si. Have you done or considered doing co-creation of service learning curriculum with the students? Do you think this may be useful? So the question of co-creation.
Yeah, I know that co-creation or co-designing curriculum is very popular. It's been getting more popular recently. For us, not so much, mainly because our service learning subjects itself, it goes through a very long process. So basically, there's not really a lot of space for co-creation with the students. But one of the things that we are trying to do is co-creation in a different form. We have been trying to help to encourage students to take service learning to a higher level by incorporating this within their own projects, incorporating this within their capstone projects. So starting from this year, we have some small grants that try to encourage teachers and students to integrate service learning into capstone projects. So this is one way in which we are encouraging students to take some agency in their learning. But what we feel is that the initial introduction into service learning, that is a broad-based thing, right? And student co-creation, once you understand about the general concept of service learning, then yes, please take it forward, integrate it into your final year project if you want to, if you can. We actually had one capstone project win a territory-wide award last year, and it was a service learning project, very, very well done. So this is where we are trying to encourage them to do co-creation at a higher level. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, and the question from Mary Anna is, how will you define the role of university on service learning and the role of community in achieving some changes into society, especially in the pedagogical process of students?
Daniel, can we ask you to answer that as
Okay.
AVP?
Now, I think the university must have vision on service learning. That is, as I said, we need to be more aware of the importance of university social responsibility. So in a way, service learning is not just service learning per se. In fact, it fits into the vision of the university that knowledge should be related to serving human needs, okay? And of course, pedagogical processes is also important because we are now talking about active learning, experiential learning. So in the process, we're changing the minds of the educators and also community leaders, let them know more about, okay, it is important to learn through doing and also to learn through experiencing. And it takes time because still a lot of teachers or community people would say that learning is just to sit here and then you listen to the teacher. But actually it is a paradigm shift, okay? Now, another question from Rob. So what is your priority for the next stage of your work at PolyU? And what are the priorities for the Asia Pacific Service Learning Community of Practice? Very, very difficult question.
I would like to address the Asia Pacific question
okay,
first,
okay.
because that is one of the things that we like to push.
Okay.
We truly feel that in the Asia Pacific region, we are now too distributed. There are lots of things going on in every single country, and what's going on in different countries are actually quite different. For example, I have learned that in Indonesia, some of the universities, they do service learning in a very specific way. They send the whole bunch of their students to the village for months at a time in summer, so that the students live with the villagers, trying to figure out, what issue they can address and how to address it. And that's very different from what we do, right? So what we hope to do is to bring the diverse communities in the Asia Pacific region closer together. And precisely that's why we organize this webinar, so that we can inform each other. Hey, what is happening in Hong Kong? What is happening in Japan, in the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, in India? Because we feel that we are developing our own sort of a version of service learning, depending on our community needs, our culture, our political situation, and so on and so forth. And those are very stimulating because it lets us see different forms, different ways of dealing with the almost as those universal issues. And also another need in the Asia Pacific region is that we, by talking with people, is a lot of people want to do research, learn how to do research and publish and do rigorous research. And a lot of us are asking each other, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you publish? Which journal to publish in? And that's something we feel we can have a lot to learn from the worldwide community, particularly from North America. But at the same time, we have to develop our own version of it. So that's something that we hope to do with this community of practice.
Yeah, in terms of priorities for the next stage of our work, the last few years, as Stephen shared during the presentation, the last few years have been very dominated by COVID, and as a result, by a lot of, but at the same time, it has borne a lot of experiences, good experience into using technology in various ways for service learning. And this is something that we want to continue pushing, even as we slowly start to emerge from COVID. We have visions about how to better integrate technology into service learning, and especially into international service learning. We also want to think about international collaborations, bringing our students or having them interact and collaborate with peers, not just communities, but also peers from around the world in different universities. This is something which I personally feel that our students are very much lacking. And past few years of COVID and us being so isolated really has not helped the matter much at all. And international understanding is something that is so needed nowadays. And this is something which I feel really needs to be priorities for the next stage, of our work at PolyU.
Thank you, Grace. A question from Andrea. The question is, do we have any plan to expand service learning to high schools?
Professor Shek, I think that you should be answering.
Okay, now, well, actually, we have that plan, and recently we have received a donation from 2 foundations, and what we're going to do is to conduct some capacity building work so that we can train high school teachers first, and of course we will also pilot some projects in high school. We hope we can do something not just for Hong Kong, because we are going to develop the e-learning packages, which eventually we hope that can benefit teachers in other parts of the world. Okay. Another question from Enha. Did the shift to online community engagement affect the compassion towards the partner community? So it is virtual, no human touch. Will it affect compassion towards the partner community?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a very good question. We are finding out in our research, when we study, because we study across all of the classes, we are finding somewhat mixed results. There are some places where students feel that, that work during online service. I mean, of course, we can't ask students to compare because they have no basis for comparison, right? So all that we can do is to compare student responses, student self-rated responses during COVID and doing online service learning from students pre-COVID, right? What we are finding is that to a certain extent, students feel that what they are doing, their service during, online service learning has a bigger impact on the community. I think because the community need is just so much more visible to them, okay? On the other hand, however, they feel that they rate lower the feelings of feeling that their work is being appreciated by the community. Okay, I think because there's less opportunities for that kind of interaction, the more informal interaction to take place, right? So we are finding somewhat mixed results about this. Overall, our results from online service learning seems to show that students are still learning. The learning is still, is still statistically significant, learning gains, right? But then it's kind of like you win some and you lose some.
Okay, the last question in the Q&A box from Wen N. Han. How do you measure students' empathy and sense of community engagement to prove that SL improve or enhance those?
We have different instruments that have been validated in the Hong Kong context to measure these. We measure them by 2 ways. One of them is pre and post experience. Actually, I feel really bad explaining this in front of Professor Shek. One way to measure this is to measure students' rating of their own ability before and after the experience, and then to see whether or not there's a difference. Another way is to measure them after the experience and to ask them to what extent, do you feel that this course improved your ability to empathize or, to feel responsible about the community, etc. Right? So there are different ways that people in research use to measure this. I think, Daniel, maybe you want to elaborate.
Actually, I think they are validated tools in the Western context and also in the Chinese context. So if you're interested, you can email us and then we can share our experience. And of course, in different cultures, there may be the need for adaptation. But by and large, our view is that some constructs are quite universally valid. So in a way, assessment should not be a very major obstacle.
Mm.
Okay. Right. I think we have handled all the questions. So in the interest of time, I guess we have to stop here. We're overrun by 10 minutes, and I know that colleagues in different parts of the world, they may have other things to do. Before we leave, shall we give a big round of applause to Stephen and Grace? Okay. Thank you both. Thank you both. And I know that there will be another webinar. Both of you will be responsible in early April, right?
There will be another webinar from the University of Pretoria at this time next week, and then the third in this series is going to be the week after that, the same time.
Okay. So see you then. And in Hong Kong, we still have a very severe pandemic. So what I can say at last is stay healthy. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.